it's time for our weekend picks. First up, talking about the lightweight contest between the WBA's regular champion, Romero, versus the challenger, Anthony Yigit, who has so decided to move down in weight, figuratively speaking, since Anthony didn't actually move down. He blew the weight, came in at a whopping 140 pounds?
Not sure, but he blew it.
He blew the weight, thus he cannot win Romero's version of the WBA title. It's important to note that this is not the full version of the title. The full version of the WBA's lightweight title rests with none other than Teofimo Lopez.
Rolly's version is the secondary version of the title.
Rolly is going to be taking on late replacement Anthony Yigit, who is standing in for Austin Dulé. Austin Dulé, who had to pull out because he's supposed to be injured. Rolly's not buying it, though it's all water under the bridge, and
Lint in the belly button.
like Anthony Yigit, Anthony who blew the weight. And I guess because Anthony is a late replacement, you can't hold it against him that he came in so far over the contracted weight for the match.
This wasn't the original plan.
Can't hold it against him because he's a late replacement. And looking at both the combatants, even though Anthony Yigit was supposed to be moving down from 140 down to 135, if you look at these two guys, Romero really does appear to be the bigger guy in spite of being the lightweight regular champion. Yeah, Anthony Yigit blew the weight, but I don't think it's going to make much of a difference because looking at these two guys side by side, Romero looks to be the much bigger guy. Romero seems to have more generous physical dimensions than Anthony Yigit, so you can't look at it as some kind of an advantage. Moreover, those of you that saw the second season of the World Boxing Super Series, portion of it took place in the 140-pound division, Anthony Yigit was there. And those of you might remember that he suffered a rather nasty hematoma at the hands of Ivan Baranchyk.
Like punching Ivan Baranchyk.
That was back in 2018, late 2018. Anthony Yigit lost that fight, he did. It's the last time I saw him. But since then, he's rebounded. He's on a 3-fight winning streak.
3 fights that he had in 2019.
It's been 2 years since Anthony Yigit had a fight, folks. The last time he was in action was in June of 2019. He did fight 3 times that year, but that was 2 years ago. I don't like his chances tomorrow night. I think he's going to get stopped because Anthony Yigit is a fundamentally sound guy who's more finesse than ferocity. He's a stick and move kind of guy, and he can do that for a while, but what he ain't got is punch.
I don't think he can keep Rolly off him.
I really don't, especially not off of 2 years of inactivity. This ain't the kind of situation you want to be in if you need to shake the ring rust off, and that's very much what Anthony Yigit is going to try to do tomorrow night, but I don't think it's going to work out for him. I don't. At best, maybe Anthony can frustrate and fluster Romero for a little while, but I think Rolly's going to get to him, and I think he's going to stop him.
Sign up for KOs.
Anthony Yigit certainly signed up for one because I think tomorrow night, Romero's going to knock him the fuck out.
Inside 6 rounds, sweetheart.
That takes care of the chief support. On to the main event of that same card, a fight of some sizable significance, especially to the junior middleweight division. I'm talking about the undisputed title fight between $1 Million Mel Charlo and Brian Castaño. This is for all the marbles, people. I don't feel that this fight has gotten the kind of promotion, the kind of shine that it should have, because these days it's very hard to get a fight like this. 2 young world champions in their prime. I'll say that both guys being on the same side of the street helped, though ultimately 2 guys being on the same side of the street don't always guarantee a fight. I reference Gary Russell Jr. and Leo Santa Cruz. I reference Jermall Charlo and David Benavidez, so on and so forth. 2 guys being on the same side of the street don't guarantee a fight, but when the guys want the fight, both sides, it does make it easier, and that is the case here.
You gotta want it.
And these 2 guys, they certainly do. It didn't take long after Brian Castaño unseated the then reigning WBO champion, Patrick Teixeira, for this fight to get made, and ideally, this is how these matters should work. You shouldn't have to wait a day and a year in order to see the best fighting the best. Jermell Charlo wants it. Jermell, who was last in action in a unification match against Jason Rosario. In that fight, I liked Jermell to win by way of knockout. Here, the situation is a little more dicey and a little more spicy. Even though Jason Rosario has more generous physical dimensions than Brian Castano, I view Brian as a more durable and well-schooled boxer than Jason Rosario.
Bigger doesn't always mean better.
Jason was almost eye level to Jermel Charlo, whereas Brian's a noticeably shorter guy than either Jason Rosario or Jermel Charlo. However, in spite of him being a smaller fighter at a height and reach disadvantage, that doesn't necessarily leave him at a complete disadvantage overall. Brian Castaño is a pocket-sized junior middleweight, yes, but very sturdy, very durable. And even though he doesn't have a whole ton of fights, the most robust body of work, what he has done is admirable. He's been in there with Michael Sorrow, Arislandi Lara, more recently Patrick Teixeira, and he's looked the part. This is a well-schooled pressure fighter who's going to stay with you and stay on you, and he's not afraid to let him go.
Whereas Jamel's a sharpshooter.
Jermel Charlo don't got the work rate of Brian Castaño. The way that breaks down is that Jermel might be the stronger puncher and perhaps the more accurate puncher, but that's because he takes his time with his shots, whereas Brian Castaño comes barreling forward, throwing punches in bunches. It's going to be very interesting seeing how it is Jermel Charlo deals with this.
Because Brian's going to try to force the action.
Try and force Jermel to fight his fight by pressuring him, cutting off the ring, getting under and or around the straight shots from Jermel Charlo, who I have no doubts will try to establish distance and spacing with his jab, with his straight shots. I think that Brian Castaño is going to get under and around that jab or catch it on the gloves and look to counter in kind. And when he does, when he's within striking distance, mid-range to inside in the pocket, that's where things are going to get interesting. That's where I think Jermel Charlo needs to unpack the counter hooks and counter uppercuts.
Now remember, this guy's durable.
Argentinian sluggers often are. They can give as good as they can get. And Brian Castaño just so happens to be one of those fighters. I'd wager that Brian's not the kind of guy that's going to crumble off the first hard shot that lands. If anything, that's going to make him want to respond in kind.
Anything that'll make him angry.
He's an unbeaten fighter, unbeaten champion, who's been in there with 2 or 3 solid guys, really solid fighters. And I've never seen Brian hurt. I've never seen Brian frazzled.
He's shown a decent beard so far.
He's well-schooled, solid amateur background, knows how to cut off the ring, knows how to get under and or around straight shots, knows how to put punches together. Volume has to go to Brian Castaño, who has the lower center of gravity, so you won't catch him off balance. He's the shorter fighter. That puts Jermel in a situation to where he's got to punch down just to try and hit him.
He's a smaller target than Jason Rosario was.
And a more defensively responsible fighter comparatively than Jason Rosario was. I think that Brian, in spite of his come-forward aggression and barrage of punches, is a harder guy to hit than Jason was. Things are going to get interesting, and the situation I see is a situation to where Jermel Charlo is going to be the one on the back foot. Jermel Charlo is going to be the one using the ring, and Brian Castaño is going to be barreling forward, trying to force the action. We're going to see a few eye-catching shots here and there from Jermel Charlo. I'd wager that the more photo finish punches are going to come from Jermel, but the majority of punches are going to come from Brian.
The scrappy stuff.
I think he'll be the clearly busier fighter, but it's going to be hard to distinguish what shots are actually getting through because he throws punches in bunches.
Jermel might block a lot of those shots.
Maybe that's going to make some of these rounds a bit hard to score. Who do you give it to? The guy showing you the photo finish punches or the guy who's throwing more, though not necessarily landing more? It's all based on what you like. Moreover, it's based on what the judges like. And in that situation, I've wrestled with this. I really have. I've wondered, Jermel Charlo packs enough pop, packs enough punch to stop Brian Castaño, who's never been stopped. And conservatively, I think a points decision win for Jermel Charlo is the way to go. And it could be contentious. I'd wager it could even be controversial.
This Argentinian kid's no mug.
I don't know that I can bank on a stoppage. I don't know that I can bank on a knockout. Perhaps a knockdown as Brian Castaño's barreling forward. Maybe Jermel Charlo unpacks one of those really short, tight uppercuts that he stopped Erickson Lubin with. And maybe that's enough to drop Brian Castaño at least once. I mean, I could see something like that happening. But actually getting the stoppage, I'm not sure. So conservatively, I'm going to go with the sharpshooting and clean punching and movement of Charlo over the aggressive pressure fighting and scrappy combinations of Brian Castaño. I'm going with Charlo to become this division's undisputed champion tomorrow night. Let's see if that's how it happens. And finally, per tweet from Michael Benson, Dillian Veit had this to say. He says, Tyson Fury has fucked the entire heavyweight scene, and the whole sport is struggling because of it. Losing Anthony Joshua versus Fury fucked boxing because casual fans just see big fights not happening and people at the top lying to them or fighting bums instead. And there's a lot of truth to that. I expect no less of Dillian Veit, who's never had hair on his tongue. His situation
Getting a lot of attention.
got a lot of people asking a lot of questions. WBC President Mauricio Sulaiman quizzed by Simon Jordan about Dillian Veit's mandatory situation and Tyson Fury versus Deontay Wilder. Portion of the article reads, many expect White, as the holder of the interim belt, to be appointed as the mandatory, and his team have previously been involved in a legal process with the WBC attempting to enforce his position. On Thursday, Sulaiman joined Jim White, Simon Jordan, and Spencer Oliver on Talk Sport. To begin with, Jordan quizzed Sulaiman on the arbitration ruling which led to the collapse of Anthony Joshua versus Tyson Fury, and asked him why the WBC hadn't seen this coming if they'd previously been aware of the Fury versus Deontay Wilder contract. Jordan began, Mauricio, can I ask you a couple of questions, and you can help educate us about boxing protocol and policies. If you're the sanctioning body, and you're sanctioning a Fury versus Wilder rematch at the same time as sanctioning Fury versus Joshua, aren't you privy to the contracts that are signed? Wouldn't you understand the obligations as the WBC champion Fury was signing a contract with Wilder for a third fight? You would be sanctioning that. So you must have a view on the contract that they're entering into and the reality of how enforceable it was, at the same time as sanctioning another fight with Joshua for your belt as well?
Essentially what he's asking him is if he saw the third Wilder fight coming.
Because both the Anthony Joshua and Deontay Wilder fights for Tyson Fury, the reigning champion, well, they would have involved his WBC title. That involves the WBC, so they must have had some knowledge.
Some insights into what was going on.
He continued, the second question I wanted to ask you is, what is the WBC's policy on mandatory challengers? Because it seems to me that what happens is the incumbent champion gets to sign fights and rematches at the expense of a mandatory challenger ad infinitum.
Which is just another way of saying again and again and again forever.
Sulaiman replied, the pandemic year has taken over all activity of not only boxing but all sports. There was the registrations of a contract for a third fight. The WBC was expecting that fight to take place in December of 2020. When that fight did not take place in December, then there were talks and a petition to sanction the ultimate unification between Fury and Joshua. For several months, there were expectations to get the date and the place. Eventually, the court ruled for the third fight of Fury against Wilder.
Oh, so you're going to let them freeze up your ranks based on their arbitration?
Whatever it is those two guys got going on with each other, you're going to stand idly by and let that deprive your interim champion of a title shot you know he's been vying for years. Jordan then reiterated his second question. What is the point of being the mandatory challenger if the incumbent champion can sign fight deals that arrange for 3 fights sanctioned by the body, which makes the mandatory challenger just sit there like a cab, waiting to be summoned? He can't be summoned because you've got fighters that are signing 2 or 3 fight deals, sanctioned by the boxing organizations. That makes a mandatory challenger almost redundant. Sulaiman responded, I don't see it that way. Unfortunately, there are circumstances at the moment which limit what I can comment and what I cannot comment. This scenario is, as I have just explained, there is a contract for a fight, there is a pandemic with travel restrictions, and many other situations. And the WBC is waiting to see all the variables to understand exactly where the heavyweight division is.
You know where it is.
White then went to an ad break with Simon unable to get the chance to quiz Sulaiman further. Jordan added, my question that was going to follow-up was, if Fury versus Wilder 3 resulted in Wilder winning, was he going to sanction the mandatory to fight Wilder, or was he going to allow another rematch between Wilder and Fury? I think that's an interesting question people would have liked to have heard the answer to.
Especially since the WBC let everybody know that Dillian Whyte's not the mandatory challenger.
If you can believe that. Just a few days ago, the WBC made it clear that while Dillian Whyte is the interim champion, and in many ways that should line him up for the winner of Wilder versus Fury 3, he has not yet been appointed as the mandatory.
It's disgraceful.
Criminal is what it is. How long the WBC has been allowed to get away with this. Whatever Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder have going on should not obstruct the obligations of the incumbent champion. Right now, that's Tyson Fury. And if you're contractually obligated, for whatever reason, to fight Wilder for a third time, that really shouldn't be the WBC's problem. And the WBC title shouldn't be all tied up with your legal conundrum. If you cannot meet the obligations of a champion, then the title should be forfeit and go to the highest ranked contender. In an ideal world, that's how it would work. But the WBC likes to act as both a sanctioning body and a promoter.
And that's not their job.
It's not your fucking job to ensure that Wilder versus Fury 3 is for the WBC title. You've got guys like Dillian Whyte paying you sanctioning fees on the premise that at some point you'll afford them the chance they've already earned, and you haven't done that. Tyson Fury or Deontay Wilder don't have to meet their obligations because you don't enforce them.
You let those guys sign 2 and 3 fight deals with no pressure.
With impunity, while your interim champion stands idly by, languishing for the opportunity that you're supposed to be affording him because he's paying you.
You're ripping him off.
It's collusion is what it is, because it looks a lot like what you're doing is providing assurances to both Team Wilder and Team Fury that they can have their fight uninterrupted without any mandates from you, when mandates are supposed to be coming from you. That's literally your job.
That's what the sanctioning fees are for.
They're not just paying you for a rank, they're paying you because at some point they want to fight for the title, and you know that.
They won't ever get to do that if you don't order the fight.
You've let Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder tie up your title for over a year without a mandate.
Now tell me something I don't know.
It's just more of the same.